Good morning, all of you. Another year has passed quickly, and we are here again with Focus 2013. On behalf of Krishna IVF Clinic, it's my pleasure to invite you all to the CME program. The idea of our CME program is to raise the standards of practice, to share experiences, and to discuss evolving strategies in gynecology, obstetrics, and infertility. Today, we have with us eminent speakers from all over India, and we truly value your participation and support for this conference. We welcome you all once again with wholeheartedly. And we begin our first session with a lecture on importance of male examination and evaluation in infertility by Dr. Ramaraju, Director of Krishna IVF Clinic. Dr. Ramaraju sir is the founder and director of Krishna IVF Clinic, graduated from Andhra Medical College in 1884, DNB in Obst and Gynecology in year 1990. He is trained in endoscopy, assisted reproduction and genetics. He is a visiting professor of Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology, Justin Liebig University, Germany. And his journey as an infertility specialist began in the year 1997. He delivered his first IVF baby in the coastal districts of Andhra Pradesh in November 1997. And first ICSI baby was born in 13th September 1998 in the state of Andhra Pradesh. His key skills lie in ultrasonography, oncology, operative laparoscopy, and assisted reproductive techniques. And he has many publications, especially international publications to his credit, and latest of which are Current Opinion on Use of Luteinizing Hormone Supplementation in Assisted Reproduction Therapy, an Asian Perspective, published in Reproductive Biomedicine Online, and sperm DNA fragmentation assay by sperm chromatin dispersion, correlation between DNA fragmentation and outcome of intracytoplasmic sperm injection, which is published in Japan's Society for Reproductive Medicine in 2013. CASA-derived human sperm abnormalities, correlation with chromatin packing and DNA fragmentation, published in Assisted Reproduction Genet. Luteinizing hormone and follicle-stimulating hormone synergy, a review of role in controlled ovarian hyperstimulation, which is accepted by Journal of Human Reproductive Sciences and yet to be published. And he has many awards to his credit, and he's a member of Asia Pacific Advisory Board on LH, Chairman Indian Advisory Board on LH, Board of Studies, Andhra University Genetics and Biotechnology, members of Postgraduate Board of Studies in Medicine and Allied Subjects, Ramchandra University, Chennai. Now I welcome you, sir, to lecture on male infertility. Thank you.
A warm welcome to my teachers and to my colleagues and to the members of the Obstetric and Gynec Fraternity of Andhra Pradesh. In this meet, what I thought was, which we practice on everyday, day-to-day basis, is largely ignored, and most of the time we are only treating the other 50% of the problems, and when it comes to an infertility workup, very rarely we see the patients as a couple, very rarely we ask for a repeat analysis, and much more rarely we don't question the report and take it at face value that is normal. When it comes to the woman, if you have a borderline abnormality of a HSC, you're doing a laparoscopy. If you're having a good ovulation but not conceiving, looking at the ovarian reserves. Why are we not looking at the male factor in the same perspective? In this journey, I want to share some of the lessons I learned in the past 15 years, which was useful to me, and that's one of the reasons to share some of those views. The whole infertility group can be divided into 3 groups: a fertile group, a subfertile group, and an infertile group. We fail to look at the problem as a couple problem, but we look at it as an individual problem. And if the woman is fertile and the man is subfertile, pregnancies do come. And if the man is highly fertile and the woman is subfertile, pregnancies do come. When both of them have subfertility factors, they take a long time to conceive. And one of them have an infertility problem and the other person is fertile or subfertile, there also it takes a time. Here is an interesting concept from the book Andrologia, wherein they divided and gave a scoring for the couple. They divided the groups into woman optimal fertility, impaired fertility, and absence fertility. Similarly, in the man, they divided them into absent fertility, impaired fertility, and optimal fertility. When you look at the slide, the person in this group will not have any treatment and they will conceive spontaneously. The person in the 2, 4, and 2 group and the 3 will also conceive, but they conceive in the early part of the treatment. And in the last group, that is the impaired woman and impaired man, these 3 things, then these people take a long period of time. In other words, if the man is optimal and the woman is optimal, they don't need any help. If the man is impaired, woman is impaired, or if it's optimal, these people with minimal treatment, they conceive. If the patient couple have a male optimal or a suboptimal factors and a female in the same perspective, where the scoring is 5 and 4, these are the people which take long time of time, and we should look at the concept of time to conception. We also should look at the age of the couple and how many years of reproductive life they have by making a decision. In other words, start looking at the couple as a unit but not as a female. That's the reason when we are failing to look at the other problem, we are diagnosing a huge group of unexplained infertility. But in true sense, we are not given this perspective to them to look at the information. So here is the highly fertile group, and here is the one which will have pregnancies in the early part of the treatment. And these are the people who take very long period of time to conceive. Every 2 to 4 years, we have a WHO manual that comes in, which defines how one should look at the seminal analysis and how and what parameters should be done to have a basic evaluation. I want all the postgraduates to go to the WHO website to download this book, because it will completely change your perspective about a seminal analysis. When you are looking at a workup, always insist that the couple should come, and at the evaluation, after you finish the physical examination, then only ask for the seminal analysis. Lot of times, we don't even bother to ask any history in the man, and we don't, maybe once in 100, we ask for a physical examination of the male, and then we ask for a seminal analysis. Once the report comes as normal, we label them as perfectly normal, and there are times when this normal value is not repeated even for 4 to 5 years, and then generally realize that one of the parameters have changed and the patient has lost of time. When it is abnormal, always repeat the analysis twice before you say it is abnormal. Once it's abnormal, your options of a hormonal evaluation and imaging and looking for a health problem which is gonotoxic. When you look at the evaluation, looking at the developmental history, checking the chronic illness problems, checking the infection, asking whether any surgery was done, and also asking what medication they are taking, and finally asking about the sexual history. And in one segment, a school performance is useful in some of the diagnosis of a Klein-Sindrich syndrome. These are the history you are supposed to ask so that you do a complete evaluation. That means looking at the developmental history, chronic illnesses, infection, whether the male had any of these procedures, what are the medication they are using, and what are the environment they have been working, and regarding their sexual history. We are always been taught that male age is not a criteria. But look here in Nature, which is one of the subsidiary journal, Asian Journal of Andrology, effect of advanced paternal age on fertility. We dogmatically say that woman's age is important, male age is not important, and never take them into criteria. And as understanding is improving, the implications of male factor is as important as the female. When you look at this slide, it looks like a typical slide of age of woman, but when you look closely, it is effect of paternal age on the percentage of pregnancy rate and mortality rate, miscarriage rate. So in this slide, we have a clinical pregnancy rate and miscarriage rate in intrauterine insemination according to the paternal age. So when you see an age group of 39, there is a decline in fertility, and as it comes to 45, there is still a further decline. When you compare this slide with the another slide, this is the clinical pregnancy rate and miscarriage rate in intrauterine insemination according to the maternal age, and this is according to the paternal age. So when you look at the graph, the abortion rate is increasing here in here. The conception rate is decreasing and decreasing. For almost a decade or so, we have missed the whole concept of this and putting our patients into the group of suboptimal treatment, and half the time we are labeling as unexplained infertility. So the emphasis has changed, giving equal importance to the age of the couple, not only in the woman, but also the male, so that we pick up these problems and do an efficient job. The other thing is, what is the frequency of sexual intercourse? As the software industry has gone up and as the lifestyle management and the working pressure has increased, the sexual frequency is significantly coming down. In fact, the software group, some of them are so naive that they tell from intercourse as a family planning method. So even though they are software personnel, we thought they are educated. They are very naive in the area of sexual education. And this is the average frequencies in 1 month. And this is the percentage of men, wherein when you look at the 50th percentile, almost around 12 times in a month. And this is coming down in the software industry to 2 or 3 times in a month. And how can they conceive even if every factor is normal? When you look at medical problems, the areas which are lot of times ignored is, we don't even see the man anytime, and we don't even know whether they have a kidney problem or a colonitis or ulcerative colitis or COPD. And of late, epilepsy is coming in and the liver problems. In addition, diabetes has turned out to be a major problem, in which the per cycle consumption rate in male diabetic without control has drastically decreased by 50%. And if the diabetes is controlled, their pregnancy rates are improving. As late as 2010, if somebody asked me about diabetes and male infertility, my knowledge at that was, it's okay. Now, we insist that the male's HbA1c comes down to 7 or less before we initiate treatment. And an uncontrolled diabetes has gross abnormalities of the sperm, and in turn, a parameter called DNA fragmentation. So when you are looking at the history, always ask for these, or at least what is common in our area, which is the diabetes, should be checked on the history and do a workup. On an average, when we see around 7 new patients a day, we are diagnosing 2 undiagnosed frank diabetes. That's the epidemic we are living in. And that's the number of patients we are going to miss by not looking at the data. When it comes to drugs, one of the surprises in the last few years is the anti-epilepsy drugs. When you find you are doing a workup, all the factors are normal, the male with the epilepsy drugs takes a longer time to conceive, but they are not able to evaluate whether the drug is the cause or the disease is the cause. The second thing is calcium channel blockers. Nifedipine, if given, can act as a contraception. There are people who had calcium channel blockers for 5 years and did not conceive, and after stoppage of calcium channel blocker, they conceived spontaneously. That is the implication of calcium channel blockers in male infertility. When you are looking at the antidepressants, the whole group act on the sperm to a little extent, but more so they delay the ejaculation. And the antiviral, where the whole immunity is disturbed and the health is disturbed. If there are few things one should ask in the drug histories, if the male is hypertensive, specifically ask for calcium channel blockers. And luckily, now people have moved to angiotensin inhibitor medication. So calcium channel blocker usage has come. But occasionally we see patients coming in using calcium channel blockers, and after finding out, we ask them to stop the drug, meet the physician, and come back with a new prescription after 6 to 8 weeks. Once the analysis is normal, we would like to give them 6 months of time before we would like to work up anything else. So the drug history should be equal thing. One is the antidepressant, calcium channel blockers, antiarrhythmic, anti-epileptic, and antiretroviral. Of all this in the clinical practice, this is the group we see, this is the group we see. When we look at the environment, especially when it comes to Vizag, the environments that are affecting Vizag at the moment are the furnaces in the industries and the drug manufacturers. If xylene is used in the drug manufacturing process or the organic solvents are used in the drug manufacturing process, we are seeing a significant decrease in the motility and in the quality of the sperm. In other words, to our area, people working in the pharmacy industry as manufacturers have a high instance of tetraspermia, and there is a village near one of those industries where the whole village accepted donor insemination as a criteria, and after 2 years of cohabitation, they're going directly for donor insemination rather than thinking anything else. That is the extent of problem. And we, as reproductive medicine specialists and as obstetricians, our role is to identify those people, help them, or eliminate the toxin so that you have a generation of healthy people. So when we ask a history, we ask about if the farmers, the presence of pesticides or fungicides, then we ask for whether they're working in the pharmacy industry, we ask for whether they're working in the steel industry and the dye industry, and of late, few of them in the lead industry, which has come down usage. So this is the problem we are missing on an everyday basis. When it comes to smoking, there are a lot of studies which found smoking, when there are more than 5 cigarettes a day, it affects the DNA fragmentation. And when you have a patient with a significant amount of tetraspermia, asking him to reduce the smoking to less than 5 will be beneficial. Some of them may not give up smoking. At that situation, prescribing a nicotine gum to them, because it's not the nicotine that is affecting the fertility, but the other things that are coming when the cigarette is smoking is reducing the fertility. So whenever you see a patient who has more than 5 cigarettes, at least motivate them to reduce it to less than 5 cigarettes so that they have a better chance. A long-term alcohol with a dysfunction of the liver produces suboptimal sperm quality and also a suboptimal health. One interesting thing we have seen is there are at least 10 families wherein brothers are getting affected with the same fertility problem. One is in the VAS absence, also in the Y chromosome deletion group, in the Y chromosome deletion groups, which is asking about the history of male factors. And as reproductive medicines, we just tell them to meet on a particular day, and with rising professionalism and both the couple working together, we are making their life much more hell, so that a guideline can be formulated so that we don't make their lives more miserable than what they are. So when you're looking at the male factor infertility, some of them do not have a demonstrable cause. That means when you're interpreting the seminal analysis data, you don't find it. But when you look at the history and other perspectives, you find a problem. Then you are finding a varicocele. The concept of varicocele is undergoing a sea change. Now the questions are being asked, does varicocele improve fertility? As on date, the opinion is divided for and against varicocele. But what we have seen is, in a small subsequent of people who have a very large varicocele and a softer testis, some of them are improving it. And the other area is very, very low counts, where you do a varicocelectomy, the patient will have adequate sperms for ICSI procedure. Then you are having the isolated sperm defects. Then you are having the congenital abnormalities, the obstruction and the non-obstruction. When we look at a cryptorchism, a single undistended testis in a male, we are confused what advice to be given. When we are seeing a male partner with a single undistended testis, most of the studies say that their fertility is partly impaired, and when it comes to a surgical opinion to the patient, asking them and telling them to have an annual examination and do a orchidectomy once the fertility issues are over. When you see a child born with undistended testis, the time to intervene has changed a lot. Now the time to intervene an undistended child, undistended testis child, if it's a term baby, it's 4 months. If it's a preterm baby, it's 6 months. Gone are the days of 10 years, 5 years, 4 years. They come down into months. A cryptorchism, when to treat in a child is within 4 months of the birth, and the second is if it's a premature at 6 months of birth. And these are the people whose reproductive function is restored. As rising society, we have moved from this stage to this stage, and then it has own implications in reproduction. An obese person from BMI 18.5 to 40, the risk of delaying the pregnancy or not getting the pregnancy is gradually increasing. So we incorporate a system of also noting down the male BMI and emphasizing the importance of the man to come down to BMI 30 so that you are reducing the variabilities. We have been all the way taught that women BMI is important, male BMI is not important. But one of the proposed mechanisms are the peripheral estrogen production and the thighs touching the testis and having an effect of temperature in reducing the quality of the sperm. In the physical examination, we completely ignore this aspect, and this is the oscillometer we use to measure the size of the testis, so that the volume of the testis gives an estimation of the amount of sperms or the seminiferous tubules that are present in the testis. So in a physical examination, unless you look at a testicular volume and then only write the investigation, most of the time it will be an issue where it's like doing an examination, not checking the ovaries on ultrasound and looking at the FSH levels. When it comes to varicocele, a small varicocele will not make any difference. If it's a large varicocele and a grade 3 varicocele with very low counts, then only there is a role for surgery. An isolated motility problem will not get benefited by varicocele surgery. And when you're selecting a patient for varicocele surgery, give a lot of importance to the grading of the varicocele and also look at where it will be helpful. A very low count with a large varicocele, 40% of them will improve, but all other groups will not improve. Incorporating and asking the urologist or the male colleague or the person by using the oscillometer, you are essentially estimating the testicular volume in a better way. If you're finding a small testis which is firm in consistency and the volume is around less than 5 ml, the possibility of Klinefelter syndrome is very high. When you're looking at a small testis which is very soft, you're looking at a testicular atrophy. In the WHO manual, when somebody is doing an analysis, the criteria how to do an analysis is there. Here, giving a container which has an adequate opening so that the sample can be collected, right? Documenting the patient's name, whether it's a coitus sample or a masturbation sample, also writing the abstinence period, and also writing the collection time will help you to analyze the information. One important thing is looking at the volume and always asking whether the sample spillage is there. The ideal way of checking it, a volume is either taking a syringe and measuring it or calculating the weight by the balance. We routinely calculate the volume by a balance. The importance of this is as follows. When you're seeing an agiospermia patient with a volume that is less than 1 ml or most of the time 0.5 ml, always anticipate a seminal vesicle problem or a prostate problem. So when you have a patient coming with low volume, ask for a repeat analysis and look for the old reports of volume. If the volume is low, the first thing that should be done is, after the physical examination and once the testis is normal, a transrectal examination and a transrectal ultrasound which picks up seminal vesicle problem and prostate problem. Once they have a seminal vesicle problem or a prostate problem, they can be labeled as an obstructive agiospermia. And the options of treatment is, if it is an ejaculated duct, surgery of the ejaculated duct by the urologist, which will give benefit for some of them. And if it is a seminal vesicle aplasia, always have the kidneys checked because they are associated anomalies with the kidney, and then go for a testicular biopsy or aspiration, whichever is convenient. So when you have a low volume ejaculate, rule out incomplete collection. Ask for the urine sample, centrifuge it, and check the pellet for occasional sperms. So once you have eliminated the retrograde ejaculation, do a transrectal ultrasound and look for the seminal vesicles and the prostate, which will most of the time give a diagnosis. When it comes to seminal analysis, if you are dealing with infertility patients on a day-to-day basis, at least spend an hour in the next 2 years in the laboratory looking at how a seminal analysis is done. Most of the time, a slide is kept, a drop of sperm is kept, and it is visually counted and has given us so-and-so volume. Insist on the counting should be on the chamber or on the markerless chamber. One of the importance of this markerless chamber is the markerless chamber has a depth of 10 micrometers, so that in a given layer of sperms, you see only one layer, so your measurement of sperm is accurate. This is a classic study wherein a group from Europe have published the data where they did similar analysis for a group of people, and this is one person's report. They did an analysis every week for 120 weeks and found the variation of between 180 million to absence of count. If we find a report which is not suitable to our thinking, we say it's a lab error. But the analysis as such has so much of variability. Motility and morphology will not have variability, but when it comes to volume and the seminal count per million, you can have these values. If you find a person here and you apply a particular medication and the count comes here, you are labeling the drug as very useful. So always remember, an analysis itself, a count has so much of variability which can change from 180 million to absence of count. So if you have a normal value and it's the first doctor for the patient, at the end of 70 days, check a second value so that you are very sure that you picked up the problem. Whereas if it is somebody with many years of infertility, there looking at average values will help you to know where exactly the still stands. In the WHO manual, a well-written article is there telling how to look at a sperm morphology at the basic laboratory. What all problems and progress that is happening in andrology is more in the area of sperm morphology, be it the deoxyoxin species effect or the DNA fragmentation, or the aneuploidy screen of the sperm, all boil down to morphological abnormalities. Here is a CASA wherein Each slide is checked in, and the sperm is automatically checked for the acrosome, the head, the length, and the neck. In the WHO, you also have a tool on the last few pages wherein there is a distribution of values of sperm in a population. The second percentile is here and the 97th percentile is here. And using this tool to plot it and look at where we stand, one is the parameters that are used are volume, total motility, concentration per ml, progressive motility, non-progressive motility, immotile sperm, and normal forms. This tool is useful in saying a borderline male factor is there or not. I find personally plotting this thing is useful when the parameters are in the borderline. The dynamics of CASA are not useful for a patient who is married for a few years and younger. It is essentially useful for somebody with more number of years to pick up the subpopulation in the motility disorders. There is a misconception where they think every patient should have a CASA analysis. It is not true. People who are having the first visit and they are married for a few years, a basic analysis and a good volume, count, and motility parameters will be adequate. But if there are more than 2 years, doing a complete analysis will help us to find out the problem. Now people have come out with measurement of the head, neck, and tail. The head of the sperm is around 5 micrometers, neck is width is 1 micrometer. So essentially, we are able to digitize the information into known values, and when we are having a normal value, it may not be true. This is a publication from Nature where they compared the morphology in humans and in stallions and in other mammals, and the observations are the stallion is a typical of a majority of mammalian species, in that a majority of the spermatozoa generated by this are normal, whereas in humans a majority are abnormal. And when this value shows an information, why should we believe a report which says 50% normal or 30% normal? That means they might not be looking at the morphology at all. Insisting on the morphology will help us to have a better diagnosis, and in turn our credibility with the patient will improve. And as you go in, you will still find some more surprises wherein people are starting measuring the area of the head, the perimeter, the length, width, and the tail length. So these are the groups which are evolving in the last 3 years, where andrological morphological evaluation is now in the center stage of analysis. The basic concept here is, if you find a larger sperm head, it is more associated with a chromatin abnormalities and aneuploidy. So when you have a larger area and a perimeter and a larger sperm, the instance of a good outcome might decrease. So looking at the morphology, both in terms of structural and, if possible, the measurement point of view will help. This is a normal sperm with slightly oval head and acrosome. Here you are finding different types of head abnormalities. The head being there, a pointed one, where the amount of acrosome is less. When it comes to midpiece, you are finding a thicker midpiece or a thin midpiece or improper fixing of the midpiece. These are the parameters which are most difficult to treat, and these are the parameters will alter motility drastically. In a tail abnormality, you can find a double tail, short tail, or a coiled tails. And these are my team members who are looking at the andrology, and they do an excellent job, each of them. A few words about ultrasonography. When you do not have a facility or a possibility of looking at the testicular size, ask for a scrotal ultrasound, look at the volume, and whether the volume is more than 10 ml or less than 8 ml. That will help you to differentiate whether you are looking at a hypo situation or a normal situation. The role of transrectal ultrasound will come in only area where the volume of this semen is low. That's the time you should do a transrectal. A scrotal ultrasound, if examination is not possible, or if examination you find a cystic space or a large varicocele to confirm it, a transrectal ultrasound's role comes in when the volume of the semen that is given is less than 1 ml, so that when you check the transrectal, you are assessing the seminal vesicles and the prostate, and you are picking up a problem there which can be correctable. When you are looking at a testicular ultrasound, every testis has a small volume, but only when the volume is large or your epidermis is thickened, that you can have a pathognomic feature. When you are looking at what to do in this situation, by just doing a biopsy, it may not be a useful thing. The role of karyotyping comes in only when there are very, very low sperms or in agiospermia with small testes. Here I am seeing an example wherein there are two X's and Y who presented as a male, and also another male showing X and a double Y. So the role of karyotyping comes in when the counts are very low, that is less than 2 or 3 million, or you have an agiospermia where you are contemplating to do a biopsy and take a sperm. You will be expecting the thing. This is the slide where morphology measurements are done. A new test that is being evolved and that is being used is the DNA fragmentation, regarding which my colleague Prakash will be speaking in the next lecture. One thing all of us should question is, sometimes we ask for a biopsy. When we are doing a biopsy of the testis, what information are we using it, and how are we helping the patient? If by doing a biopsy and you are telling the patient the sperms are there or sperms are absent, what difference does it make? And another thing is, when you are doing a biopsy, the patient will have transient hypogonadism for a period of 6 months, so that the value may not be useful. So if there is a prior biopsy, preferably wait for 6 months before you do a re-biopsy for any procedure. When taking it from the epidermis, doing a multiple biopsy in some of the non-obstructive. And the earlier concept of presenting sperms only in obstructive agiospermia, but not in maturation arrest, is proving to be wrong. This is the Sertoli cell, the maturation arrest, and the obstructive. All 3 persons can father a child, but the success rate of fathering the child is highest in the obstructive, moderate in the maturation arrest and the Sertoli cell. When you are using these 2 things, doing a Y chromosome deletion and a karyotyping will help us to find a problem which is more genetically related. And when you prepare a wet smear of this biopsy, this is how a sperm looks like. Our team was fortunate in participating in the EQA SRM quality control, and I am proud to say my team members' photos who I have seen are falling at 65 to 70th percentile. And at one point you see people are not fathering the child, and here is a photograph from National Geography. The number of child he could produce from his 5 wives are these many. I thank my team members for supporting in this endeavor. I thank Mark for helping us in conducting the meeting. I thank one and all.
Thank you very much, sir, for enlightening the audience on the enigmatic male factor infertility. And now I request Dr. Abha Majumdar Madam to hand over a memento to Dr. Ramaraju, sir. Let's move on to the next topic by Dr. Jayaprakash, who is a dedicated embryologist of our unit with professional experience of 9 years. He has done his post-graduation and PhD from Andhra University, Visakhapatnam, and he has been a co-author of 21 publications in the field of infertility. Now I request Dr. Jayaprakash to impart his lecture on sperm DNA fragmentation and what it means. Please welcome Dr. Jayaprakash.
Good morning to all. Today I discuss brief about sperm DNA fragmentation. In this topic, I try to cover the structure of sperm DNA and what is meant by DNA fragmentation and different causative factors for sperm DNA fragmentation and different identification tests for DNA fragmentation and the influence of DNA fragmentation on reproductive outcome. The structure of sperm DNA. Spermatozoa is a very small structure, but whereas large amount of DNA must be placed into a very small container, that is acrosome. This task can be done with the help of protein core. So DNA in combination with protein core forms as chromatin. During this process, the DNA twisted on itself and wrapped around the blocks of protein, and the DNA is compressed and compacted and forms as a chromatin structure. So the basic proteins which are involved in the packing of DNA is histones and protamines. So what is the functions of this protein core? The primary function is to protect the DNA from physical